Hi, thank you. So I guess I will kick it off and get things started. I mean, what an amazing time to be talking about equity and belonging and trying to unpack something that is really playing out on a global stage in a very different way than I've seen it play out in past iterations. And unfortunately, right, this is not new. Equity, people feeling the need to belong, to be treated as human. So, when we agreed to do this panel, the environment was different. So, I definitely am feeling a different way in moderating this panel. And my guess is my colleagues do as well. There's so much to unpack. And we started talking about diversity and inclusion now, equity and belonging. And now you have corporate CEOs not just talking about equity or gender equity or pay equity, but racial equity. And you have CEOs speaking openly about systematic racism. And you have senior leaders telling their stories about racism in a very different way. And I think that this is an environment where I hope that we are at a stage where the corporate response will not be a one and done, that this is a beginning of a journey that will not just be steeped in words, but action. And I am really hopeful that we'll start to see some results for all of our efforts, both within the corporate realm and on the broad global stage that Marc is leading the effort on. So I'm excited. I know you guys aren't here to hear from me. I want to jump into it. And, Marc, I'd like to start with you just to talk about what do you think are some of the economic.
Okay, now I'm back on. I'm back on. Just click on that link again. I'm back on. Okay, perfect, sir.
Are we good? Hear. Okay, we can hear you, Marc.
I can't hear you. I can hear you, but I couldn't hear. Did you ask me a question?
I was
I'm sorry,
just about
it dropped. Okay, I can hear you now.
No. So
I miss your entrance.
I set the stage, right? Today, this current environment's very different than even when we agreed to do the panel.
Yeah.
And, our corporate CEOs are talking not just about equity, but racial equity and are speaking out against systematic racism. So I do feel like times are different, and I do feel like we can have a conversation in a different kind of way. Mm-hmm. And I was going to throw it over to you, Marc, to really set the stage around, the underlying factors that are impacting ultimately our communities and workforce and the work that you're doing.
So I really want to thank you for the question, and I'm honored to be a part of this summit, and I want to thank all those who are listening. We are at a moment of American transformation. If we don't recognize that we are at a different moment, at a special moment, at a moment when we are challenged and we must meet that challenge, then we have not done our generation good service. The rise of the conversation and the need for action around issues of racial equity have been in the making for a very, very long time. And what has happened is that as we entered 2020, we had low unemployment. We had an economy which appeared to be growing at a reasonable rate. But we still had wide economic pain due to income inequality, racial inequality, and the racial wealth gap. And all of a sudden, this nation was hit by two tsunamis at once. The tsunami of COVID-19, an unprecedented health emergency, which forced all of us, in response to the recommendations of experts, to shelter in place, to self-quarantine, as we saw a nation unprepared for this emergency struggle struggled to respond, and the resulting strategies created a self-induced economic coma. And then we were hit with these examples of violence against black people. In the case of George Floyd, police violence. In the case of Ahmaud Arbery, vigilante violence. In the case of Breonna Taylor in Louisville, police violence. Boom, boom, boom. One behind the other. And in the Floyd case, people saw it. They saw the injustice, the unfairness, the out and out public murder of a man who did not deserve to die. And so it's been a wake up call. There's been an explosion of protests, mostly peaceful, with some who've tried to hijack it for their own purposes. And the resulting consciousness, I've heard from no less than 8 to 10 CEOs of major companies outraged and wanting to respond. Every walk of life. I've heard from New Zealand and Australia, and people are protesting in every community. And people are protesting in Paris, France. And these protesters are black people and white people. They're just Gentiles, Protestants, Catholics, and Muslims. They're from every race and every generation because of the sense of outrage at what happened to Mr. Floyd, but the sensibility that this is a moment for transformative American change. And business, which has an oversized impact on decision-making in the American economy, should consider this. In the last 30 years, since 1990, the American economy has tripled in its GDP. An enormous growth rate enabled by technology, enabled by capital formation, enabled by a combination of governmental policies. But as that growth occurred, it lifted some boats, and some boats barely could keep their heads above water. And where we are today is where we are today. And underneath that, you've had the continued, if you will, adjusted policies when it comes to the criminal justice and the police system. So we've got to recognize this moment for what it is. What's the fundamental problem with the American economy? People who work and earn money. Many do not earn enough for the basic necessities of life: food, clothing, shelter, health care, to take care of their children. That's a fundamental issue. And it plays out with a racial dimension, and it plays out with a class dimension. But at the end of the day, too many people simply cannot make ends meet. And it's different than it was in 1985. That factor alone, because wages have not kept pace with inflation. And so we've got to confront these economic issues, and then we've got to confront the social justice issues of the criminal justice system and the police justice system in America. It's that kind of moment. And let me say this.
It is. You know, Marc,
I am tired of, yeah.
I'm so sorry.
I'll stop there.
Yeah, we had to have that conversation, you know, which is important to start. But I really think that actually where I'm sorry, cut you off, is a great place to bring Irina in, because you talk about pay equity, right? And you talk about the disparities, whether or not it's race or gender or class. And Irina has done a lot of work at Horizon around pay equity, which is a big corporate issue. So I want to bring you into the conversation and share what you found in your work.
Thank you to both, and thank you, Marc, for that opening, because we're living in a unprecedented time indeed, and as there is an opportunity as corporations are paying attention to ask the more fundamental questions. As we embarked in inclusion and diversity strategies, programs, and such, many people do ask the question, do we have pay equity? But they sort of ask the question. They assume, they look at their numbers without doing the real analysis that it's out there. And the data is clear. Erika, you know these, we all know these. We have the data on women being paid 80 cents on the dollar for what males make. We have a lot of data, not as much and as clear about the racial inequalities in our pay practices. So what I think your question is this is an opportunity to not just talk about these issues, but to put the money where our mouth is and to do the work. And many companies start and they do this work under privilege because it's important that if they find inequalities, they don't have to deal with them. They might be expensive, they might be hard to address. And I just want to invite my corporate partners to really ask the question, equal pay for equal work has to be at the fundamentals of what we do in the inclusion and diversity space.
I absolutely agree. And what has been the response around, what you've shared with senior leadership?
People have fear. They have fear that it's going to be a very expensive proposition. It's where the economics come to the game, right? It's, let's do this, but let's do it in a way that if we have to address it, we have 10 years to address it. I think that's unacceptable, and that we have to speak up about these things, that we have to address them. This is something that I've done a lot of work. I'm part of a very broad network of HR community. I'm the chair of the board of the Human Resource Management Association of Chicago. I think we have to be vocal about these. We have to present these issues in a way that we can be scared to see the results. Every annual report, our CEOs who now are incredibly active with this space, and we have an opportunity, but every one of them would say, employees are my biggest assets. I'm focused on inclusion and diversity. I'm focused on doing the right things. I'm training on unconscious biases. All of these programmatic elements, I believe we have to do the fundamental work. The fundamental work is to ensure that ethnic minorities, that Black Americans, that women get paid equally for equal work. If we don't have that, all of those programmatic elements are good things to do. They're not enough, and they're not going to get us far enough because of the major inequalities that exist. And Marc was talking much more robustly about what some of those fundamental social issues are that are out there.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's a great throwback to Marc to talk about the fundamental issues and what are the initiatives that he's driving to address the most critical issues in our community.
Thank you very much. And I'll just add this. So, in this moment in time, I think we've got to seize the mantle of police reform and recognize that the systems and the structures, which are quote unquote designed to hold police misconduct accountable, are broken. To understand that the system and structures which are designed to ensure that there are appropriate parameters, guardrails, and standards for the use of force on citizens are indeed in many places broken. How to fix it? It requires changes in law at the federal level, changes in both law and policies at the state and local level. Every single police department is not exactly the same. Some have better records than others, but the system and the culture which says that if I see my partner violate the rights of another citizen, if I see them engage in violence against a citizen unnecessarily, it's my responsibility to keep my mouth shut, to not say anything. I feel no affirmative obligation to the truth. I feel no affirmative obligation to what is right. That's the brokenness of the police system, and that brokenness contributes to what you saw in Minneapolis, where two officers held down a man. One officer stood watch while another officer, in effect, put his knee and the full weight of his body. And that officer, I might add, had a history of citizens' complaints. That officer, I might add, was in effect divorced by his wife the day after the incident occurred. So we've got to seize the time. We've also got to seize the time on the broader economic issues, which are far more complex and cannot be fixed with a bill here or a bill there, an initiative here or an initiative there. What we must understand is the damage that an exclusionary society has caused, and what we must commit to is a new American movement, as this nation faces its 250th birthday 6 years from now in the year 2026. And that new American movement has to be a movement for diversity, for equity, for inclusion, for justice against hate. Look at what we witnessed. We witnessed hate crimes in synagogues, in churches, in mosques. We witnessed the disparagement of Asian Americans. We witnessed the continuing corrosive nature of the after effects of slavery and segregation. I grew up in the South. As I went to school for the first time in kindergarten, first grade, it was the first or second year that schools in my neighborhood were integrated. But in order to get to that school, I had to leave the black neighborhood to go into an all-white neighborhood. And I've witnessed a change. This is not to say there have not been changes in America, but I just have a sense that we've reversed course. We've gone backwards, and we've got to seize this moment and understand that people all over the nation are crying out for a new direction, a different direction, and a direction of equity, a direction of inclusion, a direction of fairness as this country becomes a multicultural democracy in the 21st century.
That's right. And actually, people standing by and, being bystanders, right? Watching this happen. And we talk in the corporate America, in the D&I space, and the HR space around people being upstanders, right? Speaking up and being inclusive leaders. So Irina, I want to throw it to you to talk about how you are talking to your people about being upstanders, about being inclusive leaders, and also how are you using your influence to influence your peers to do some of the work that you're doing at their companies?
Yeah, there is a lot of work that still needs to be done, and I think it's launching on the work that us and all companies in America have started to do around inclusion and diversity. But then you see what happened over the last few days, and people are still scared to talk about race in the workplace. It's almost like the workplace has to be colorblind, which is such a tremendous concept and something that we want to break. We want to break in corporate America, but it's almost people are fearful. And on Monday morning we're getting on conference calls, and leaders were much more worried about maybe the violence or the store that had been violated than asking our African American and Black colleagues how they were feeling. And it's not a hard question, but somehow there's a lot of fear in the system, and we still don't know how to talk about these things in corporate America. So I'm excited to see a lot of CEOs coming out and talking about these. I think there is a moment to be seized, and we have to think carefully in corporate America how we sustain this over time and create real change, and not just be out here for the showing in the short period of time.
No, I think that's right. And what I can say, at Goldman Sachs, we are talking about race. And, we are, for the first time, when somebody asks, colleagues, how are they doing? People are saying not okay. Right. And the storytelling that is happening on our global corporate stage by some of our senior most Black executives has, I think, created a new level of understanding through their sharing their lived experiences that I think will go a long way with their partners and our firm's culture over the long run. So I see
the change.
Yeah, this is different, and I hope it stays different so that we can actually see some real progress. And, this is a topic we could have spent hours on. I spend all day talking about it. And I'm so grateful to you two to being a part of this panel. This is the beginning of a
Thank you.
discussion. I hope we get to talk more and together. And thank you so much to the Social Innovation Summit for having the three of us. Thank you, Toot, for being amazing panelists and for the work that you are doing. Marc, you're on the front lines. I admire you greatly. Irina,
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate the work you're doing at Horizon. And congratulations to the summit for really rich content today. Everybody have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.